Most people remember John Denver as the calm, smiling voice behind "Take Me Home, Country Roads." He seemed like the kind of man who lived the peaceful life he sang about. But that picture hides a very different story. Behind the music was heartbreak, anger, regret, and dreams that almost reached the stars. His life was filled with moments that seem impossible to connect to the same person. A broken marriage. A father who rarely showed love. A chance to become one of the first civilians in space. And a final flight that ended only 15 days after he bought a new airplane. How could all of those moments belong to one man? The answer is far more surprising than most people realize. In 1982, John Denver's marriage to Annie Martel finally came to an end. Like so many divorces, they divided their home piece by piece. Every room carried memories. Every object reminded them of what they had once shared. But then something happened that shocked everyone around him. John left the house furious. When he returned, he wasn't carrying flowers or paperwork. He was carrying a chainsaw. First he sliced through a corner of the kitchen table. Then he destroyed furniture in the dining room. Finally he walked into the bedroom they had shared for years and cut the headboard apart before splitting the bed straight down the middle. It sounds like the kind of story tabloids invent. But it wasn't. John admitted it himself years later in his autobiography, almost with embarrassment. Annie later said the man holding that chainsaw felt nothing like the gentle husband who had once written her the greatest love song of his career. But how did someone change so completely? To understand that, you have to go back to the very beginning. John wasn't even born with the name the world would later celebrate. His real name was Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., born on New Year's Eve in 1943 in Roswell, New Mexico. His father, known as Dutch, was an Air Force pilot who shattered speed records and earned a place in military history. He could fly faster than sound itself. But there was one thing he struggled to do. Show affection to his own son. Because of his father's career, the family moved constantly. Before John had a chance to settle into one school, another move came along. Friendships disappeared almost as quickly as they began. As a child, he once tried running away from home, hoping to escape the loneliness, but he didn't make it very far. The only place that ever felt like home was his grandmother's farm in Oklahoma. There, life slowed down. There were animals to care for, open skies, and country music drifting through the air. Most importantly, one of his grandmothers handed him an old Gibson guitar when he was just 11 years old. That guitar became the one thing that stayed with him when everything else kept changing. But could that simple gift really change his future forever? Years later, John left college before finishing his architecture degree and drove to Los Angeles with little money and that same guitar. Success didn't come easily. Audition after audition ended in rejection. Then one music producer gave him blunt advice. A name like Deutschendorf, he said, would never fit on a concert poster. So John looked at a map and chose the capital of the state he loved most. From that day forward, he became John Denver, quietly leaving behind the family name his father had spent a lifetime building. Not long after, he beat hundreds of hopeful singers to join the famous Mitchell Trio. Around the same time, he wrote a simple song called, "Babe, I Hate to Go." It was never meant to become famous. He gave copies to friends as Christmas gifts. Then fate stepped in. The song reached Peter, Paul and Mary, who renamed it "Leaving on a Jet Plane." It became their only #1 hit. John received songwriting credit, but very little money. Even worse, his own first 3 solo albums failed. It looked as if he might always be remembered as the songwriter behind someone else's success. But everything was about to change. And so was his relationship with the father he had tried so hard to escape. For years, John and Dutch barely understood each other. His father drank heavily, rarely expressed emotion, and seemed far more comfortable inside an airplane than inside his own home. Yet something unexpected happened after John became famous. He decided to learn to fly. And the person who taught him was his father. For the first time in their lives, they finally spoke the same language. Not through long conversations, but through flying. John fell deeply in love with aviation. Over the years he logged more than 2,700 hours in the air and earned ratings in several different types of aircraft. He even flew his own Learjet and collected vintage airplanes. Flying became the place where he finally felt free. But here's the strange part. The same passion that brought father and son together would one day lead to tragedy. By the early 1980s, John wasn't just a singer anymore. He joined the board of the National Space Society and helped support NASA's Citizens in Space program. More than anything, he wanted to become the first civilian astronaut. He wrote NASA a detailed letter volunteering for the mission. He passed the medical exams. He passed the psychological testing. NASA even honored him with its Exceptional Public Service Medal for his work. John believed he was the leading candidate. Then everything changed. President Ronald Reagan announced that the first civilian in space would instead be schoolteacher Christa McAuliffe. She was selected from more than 11,000 applicants. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after launch. Everyone aboard lost their lives. John had come painfully close to sitting in that very seat. He honored the crew by recording the song, "Flying for Me," and organized a benefit concert to help their families. Publicly, he accepted what had happened with grace. Privately, he still chased the dream. He even explored the possibility of flying aboard the Soviet space station Mir, willing to spend millions of dollars and train in Russia. The plan never happened. Yet he never stopped reaching for the sky. But while his dreams soared higher than ever, his personal life was falling apart. John and Annie had married back in 1967, long before fame arrived. Together they faced years of struggle. They couldn't have biological children, so they lovingly adopted a son and later a daughter. Their marriage survived hardship, but success brought new problems. Endless touring kept John away from home for weeks at a time. Annie often felt abandoned. During one difficult period, John left for Switzerland for only 6 days. To Annie, it felt like months. When he returned, they decided to give their marriage another chance. Then something magical happened. While riding a chairlift in Aspen, John wrote an entire song in his head before reaching the top of the mountain. He rushed home, grabbed his guitar, and played it for Annie that same day. That song became Annie's song. It climbed to #1 around the world and became one of the greatest love songs ever recorded. Around the same time, John released hit after hit, including Rocky Mountain High, Sunshine on My Shoulders, Thank God I'm a Country Boy, and Calypso. He performed at the White House, starred in movies, and filled arenas across America. From the outside, his life looked perfect. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. Annie later admitted the song eventually felt less like a celebration of their love and more like a wish for something that no longer existed. John later confessed to repeated affairs. By the end of the 1970s, he was rarely home. The marriage slowly collapsed until it ended with the unforgettable chainsaw incident. Then came another relationship that seemed full of hope but ended just as painfully. While touring Australia in 1986, John met singer Cassandra Delaney. She was 25. He was 42. Their romance moved quickly. They married in 1988, and less than a year later welcomed their daughter, Jessie Bell. For John, it felt like a miracle. Doctors had once believed he couldn't father a biological child. But the happiness didn't last. Cassandra later described a relationship damaged by drinking, jealousy, and emotional conflict. After years of legal battles, they divorced in 1993. She received primary custody of their daughter. And on the very night that divorce became official, John was arrested for driving under the influence. Sadly, it wasn't the end of his troubles. Another alcohol-related driving incident followed. The Federal Aviation Administration eventually warned him that he had to stop drinking if he wanted to keep flying. When officials decided he hadn't met those requirements, they revoked his medical certification. Legally, he could no longer pilot an aircraft by himself. Most people would have accepted that decision. John didn't. And that choice would change everything. In September 1997, John purchased an experimental aircraft called the Long Easy. It looked sleek and modern, but there was a hidden flaw. During an early flight with his mechanic, they discovered the fuel selector valve had been installed behind the pilot's left shoulder instead of within easy reach. To switch fuel tanks, John would have to twist completely around while flying. The mechanic even tried modifying the handle, but it still wasn't easy to reach. On the morning of October 12, the mechanic offered to fully refuel the airplane. John declined, believing he would only be flying for about an hour. That afternoon he took off from California's Monterey Peninsula. After practicing several touch-and-go landings, he headed out over the Pacific Ocean. Then one fuel tank ran dry. To switch to the other tank, John had to reach behind his shoulder while still controlling the aircraft. Investigators later concluded that as he twisted around, he likely pressed a rudder pedal without realizing it. The airplane suddenly yawed, pitched upward, stalled, and plunged into Monterey Bay. People watching from shore first believed they were seeing an air show maneuver. Instead, they had witnessed John Denver's final moments. His last radio transmission had been calm and completely routine. Then the silence came. Toxicology reports found no alcohol and no drugs. He was 53 years old. After his death, thousands gathered beneath the open sky in Aspen to honor the man whose songs had celebrated mountains, rivers, and endless horizons. His ashes were scattered across the Rocky Mountains he loved so deeply. Months later, he won the only competitive Grammy Award of his career for a children's album he had finished shortly before his death. He never lived to hear his own name announced. Today, Rocky Mountain High is one of Colorado's official state songs. Take Me Home, Country Roads became one of West Virginia's official state anthems, even though its writers had never actually visited the state when they wrote it. Over his career, John Denver sold more than 33 million records, released dozens of hit albums, and wrote around 200 of his own songs. Yet the numbers tell only part of the story. The gentle singer, the frustrated husband, the son searching for his father's approval, the dreamer who almost became an astronaut, and the pilot whose greatest passion became his final journey were all the same man. And perhaps that's the real John Denver. Not the perfect image people remember, but the complicated human being behind it.